Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're getting everyone in from the waiting room here. And we'll start in just a moment. Okay, looks like everybody's in for now. All right, hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Seth Pringle. I am your host for this talk with Tony Abeyta. And, oh, hold on one second. Yeah, so we're very excited to have Tony Abeyta giving an online artist talk. Thank you all for making your generous donations to attend this talk. We, the Maloof has we've been doing these online talks since the beginning of the COVID shutdown, and we're continuing to do them even though we've reopened. So we're excited to see that you've all joined us. And as long as people keep showing interest in these talks, then we will keep doing them. Because I think they've been a great way for everyone to connect, especially from long distances. And we have reopened at the Maloof. We are open for tours of the historic home. The gallery is open with an exhibition entitled Artist's Hands with works from the collection, as well as borrowed works from contemporary artists. We have new sculpture in our Discovery Garden. We have installations by Tanya Kovaleski, Martha Moran, and Sumi Foley, which have just been recently installed. So come visit us. We hope to see you in person soon. So before I start the talk, just so you know, we'll be doing a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions for Tony, type them into the chat box at any time during the talk, and we'll just get to those at the end. But feel free to type those in at any time. So before I introduce Tony, I'm going to start with our native land acknowledgement. The Salmon-o-Freda Maloof Foundation for Arts and Crafts acknowledge the Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, or the Tongva world. This area includes the Los Angeles Basin, South Channel Islands, San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys, and portions of Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work for the Taraxacome, or indigenous peoples in this place. As an institution located on unceded indigenous land, we pay our respects to Hanukvitum ancestors, Ahi Hirom elders, Ivu Hinkem, our relatives, relations, past, present, and emerging. Okay, so it's my honor to introduce Tony Abeyta. Tony Abeyta graduated from the Institute of American Indian Arts in 1986 with an Associate of Fine Arts degree, received a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Maryland Institute College of Art, a Master of Fine Arts from New York University, and was awarded an Honorary Doctorate of Humanities from the Institute of American Indian Arts in 2013. He's also attended schools in Southern France and Florence, Italy. Known for his contemporary mixed media paintings, he is most inspired by the New Mexico landscape. Abeyta's work is included in multiple collections, including the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, Boston Fine Arts Museum, Heard Museum, New Mexico Fine Art Museum, Denver Art Museum, Crocker Museum, the Autry Museum of the American West, and the Edeljorg Museum, as well as several other public and private collections. A few of his awards include the 2012 New Mexico Governor's Excellence in the Arts Award, the 2012 Native Treasures Living Treasure by the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, and the 2018 Gene Autry Memorial Award from the Autry Museum of the American West. He lives and works in both Santa Fe, New Mexico and Berkeley, California. In 2017, Tony Abeyta curated an exhibition at the Maloof titled Neo-Native Toward New Mythologies. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tony. Tony, thank you so much for doing this.
Great. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you, Seth. I am Tony Abeyta. I am currently in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and preparing for an art exhibit on August 20th for my gallery, which is Owings Gallery here in Santa Fe. I also work, well, really between, like Seth said, between two different places, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Berkeley, California. So I want to preface a little bit of this presentation this evening with just beginning with my relationship with the Maloof Foundation. I came in contact with Sam probably 15, 16 years ago, and he came into my consciousness of some common clients of his and mine let me know that they had visited with Sam Maloof at his residence, and he had several of my father's paintings. And I was like, that's interesting, because those are really rare. My father was a painter from the Santa Fe Indian School in the 30s, before World War II. He was painting under a school called the Dorothy Dunn School of Painting. And at that time, Sam's first wife, Elfrida, was the director of the arts at that institution, at the Indian School. And she became really dear friends with my father. And as a result, they had a lifelong friendship, which Sam had known my father, and whenever he came out to the Southwest, which they both loved the Southwest. So they had great stories about meeting Maria Martinez, the famous San Ildefonso Pueblo potter. My father and a number of jewelers, potters, they had a very dear and wonderful relationship with the Pueblo of San Ildefonso. So they were very welcome there as almost an extended family to that Pueblo. And I met him. I was working on an exhibit at the time at the Southwest Museum, which at the time was connected with the LA, with LACMA, right down there on Wilshire Avenue. And so I was doing a retrospective of my work, it was really a 10-year retrospective. And so I was doing a lot of these trips to LA, and I had a lot of time. So I came out to visit him at the old residence, which is now is it the 210 freeway that is now is now gone through that property. And I was there during that relocation. So the relocation was, I became very dear friends with Sam, and he had lost Elfrida, and I watched as this new place was just a hillside, and there were no trees on it, and I watched the whole trajectory of the Sam Maloof residence, the new residence being, I remember everything being drawn on, drawing tables, and I watched them move books, photograph everything in situ, and then move everything over. And it was a wonderful experience, because I watched what looked to be, wow, I don't know if this, if I personally could handle all of this immense relocation that was happening with Sam. It was an emotionally difficult time in his life, but it gave me insight of the perseverance of an artist who used it as an inspiration to continue working and to continue being creative on the new residence, on the grounds, working with the wood shop. And what this meant to me as a young artist was showing me that, I think, Sam, I learned a lot about faith, right? Like, I learned that when things seem impossible, anything is possible. And all you have to have is a little bit of patience and vision And so really the beginning of this presentation is really about inspiration and mentorship, and also manifesting things in your life that sometimes we don't think we can accomplish, but we can really accomplish a great many things when we put our minds to it with the help of other people and our community, and certainly with uh, a source of belief, with higher power of sorts. So that's what Sam was to me. He was a mentor. He was a spiritual mentor. He directed me through a great many things. So we became very dear friends, and I learned about art and collecting, and we ate meals together, and many of which were just at a simple place called In-N-Out Burger. And so that's that. So I know a lot about wood. I know a lot about line and design, and I'm a collector of Sam's work. He was a collector of my work. We did trades. I'm sitting in a rocking chair that I traded him for a number of paintings that are now at the foundation there. And I have to press with that because that's why I'm here this evening having this dialogue with you. We're going to take like a minute to try to get some images of my work up. So I'm never professional at all this Zoom stuff. So I'm going to just do what I do and see if we can do this. All right, Seth, I'm looking for an option to share screen with you all. And
Looks good.
does that look like it'll work with you guys?
Yeah, that looks great.
Fantastic. So I'm going to jump back to this image, which is the start page, and it's a picture of me on my Jeep. I'm American Indian. I'm Navajo. I was from born and raised in Gallup, New Mexico. My reservation is a place right outside of Albuquerque called Tuahajile, and that is a place where my father was raised, and I was never reservation raised, so I was always sort of in a more urban environment. But the interesting thing about the community that I come from, it is a community that we are all the descendants of relocation. We were, our original homelands were on the Navajo Nation in a place called Canyon de Chelly, which is this really beautiful place. And in about 1868, there was a relocation by the US government of the Navajo people to a place called the Bosque Redondo. And this was a journey that was done in the winter, and there were two large campaigns of people that were relocated, and also in many eyes of not only Navajo people, but historically it was an act of genocide to take women, children, and families on this long relocation journey in the middle of winter where many people died. And so my community was a place where a group of Navajos stopped and would go no further, so that in the middle of winter they were left there to die, and they survived and they continued to call that home. So for me, I often reflect on what it feels like to be living in contemporary times. And so tomorrow I'm going to go back to my homelands just for the weekend, just to take a break from painting and to go to Canyon de Chelly. And I know it's been raining a lot here, so the river's running there. And these are the small, simple things that I look forward to. So I too, somehow in my DNA and in my past, understand what it feels like to be relocated, not by highway, but by the US government. So this is just something that I mentioned in terms of like the connection of what it feels like to have different levels of trauma that we come from, and how do we evolve and create and become better people and learn from these things, and also heal from these traumas. So this picture of me and Shiprock, which is a mythological rock. I think it's closest to Farmington and maybe the border of Colorado. And it's also one of the places that I go back home and still call home. It's still Navajo Nation. We're the largest tribe in the United States. I'm going to run through a number of slides and try to give you sort of an idea of what I do. So this is a painting that directly relates to two things, to California and to New Mexico. I live between those two places. This painting is actually called Corner of Pico and Powaki. So Pico is this, street in LA, and I woke up at a hotel on Pico, and I had to be back for a meeting in New Mexico. And I had to go out to this place called Powaki, which is it's a small American Indian pueblo just north of Santa Fe. And so I had taken the nonstop flight from LA into Albuquerque, drove to Powaki, and then I went back to the studio and I started this painting. And I didn't really know what to call it, but I came up with the idea of calling it the Corner of Pico and Powaki, because it was really about two different things, two different, a place of a metropolitan, cosmopolitan, urban place, and then some place that was directly connected to traditional ceremonial kinds of life, and also Native American, modernism. So this painting is a more contemporary version of hunting cats. So it's based on Navajo sand painting motifs, but in a much more contemporary and more, I feel like the color palette being much more of a earth tone palette, closer to the earth, closer to the narrative that is about land, is about animals, is about nature. Most of my work is really reflecting nature, abstraction, highly abstract, but influenced by American modernism. So you'll see elements that are in these paintings that you'll recognize as being, they have almost a feeling of 1930s or 40s, almost like a WPA sensibilities. When we get to the landscapes, you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. This is a painting that I did where I mixed sand directly into the pigment, and it's called The Arrival of the Eagles. And so it has a much more caramel terracotta palette. So one of the things that I do is try to, some days I wake up and I want to work in a really rich urban palette where they're bright reds and lime greens and yellows and things that are influencing me from the vernacular that I'm living in. And so when I'm in New Mexico, you can almost tell the paintings that I do in New Mexico and the ones I do in California, the ones that are influenced by, this one is called Night into Day into Night. So it's everything. If you look at the left-hand side of it, it begins in aqua blues, and then it moves into, sort of more warm tonalities, and then back into these aqua blues. It's everything that transpires in a day. So there is this feeling that there is night and tranquility and dawn, and then you have all of this chaos and stuff that happens in a day. A lot of these paintings feel frenetic. They feel a lot of activity, shapes, forms moving around in a very undefinable space. And then they all represent things that are characters, and they can be botanical, biomorphic, biomechanical, and abstract, but the shapes and the forms all have, for me, they represent emotional feelings, responses to people, places, revelations, inspirations. And I don't draw these out, I just allow them to happen. So when I'm painting, it's a free-flowing consciousness, which is, I feel like it's external, and it comes as an inspiration while I'm painting, while I'm beginning the works. And I allow that unhindered. I just allow it to manifest. So in a way, I'm creating things that have never existed before. And I try to be unapologetic about them, so that they just represent a really simple thing, like, day into night. And what transpires. And for me, that's just one aspect of what I do. Uh, let's see. Okay, this is another image from that same series. They're free floating gestures. They're symbols. If it were, in this case, it's about night and music. So I listen to a lot of music. You'll see it in almost all of the works, and each one has its own uh, feeling. You know, this is more about jazz. It has an element of, for me, it's like Miles Davis, and I let music influence me. I let traditional American Indian ideologies and ceremonialism, iconography, color palettes to affect how I'm working, the vernacular where I'm at, and that is always part of the experience. In this case, music. There's a big, large mural that's it's at the Heard Museum. If you ever get to Phoenix, it is not always on exhibit because it's in their main gallery. And when they do other exhibitions for other artists, they build a wall over it. So about every 2 or 3 years, it gets boarded up for a new exhibition. And so it's not available. But so each time they open it up, people think that I did this new mural there. And it's been there for about 15, 16 years. And one of the things they do at the museum is they have concerts in front of it. And so I caught a photo of it when they had the piano there. Again, black and white works that are reflective of Native American ritual, of song, of music. Almost all of the photos, for some reason, that I've chosen are going to reference my relationship with sound and music and rhythm and dynamics. And sometimes they have animals in them. Other times you'll see that they'll have birds. I've done ones with cats. I just allow the process to dictate the outcome. And sometimes I don't even feel I'm responsible for them because I just do them and they happen. And that's what it is. This is I started landscapes, right? Because I'm spending a lot of time outdoors. And especially during the pandemic, my whole show in August is really all about my experiences of being outside and hiking and fishing and what it feels like to be back into nature. This is the Grand Canyon. It took 2 years, and I just sat up on the rim of the Grand Canyon and thought about what is it that is part of the experience. And I watched the clouds move and change, and the canyon's never the same. It's always changing. And I shot some photos on my phone, and I came back and started this painting and continued over the next 2 years of trying to, and some of the influences, like if you're going to paint the Grand Canyon, for me, I had to look at like who's really good at painting the Grand Canyon. And I really referenced a lot of Thomas Moran. He had a studio there, he worked there, and he really saw that. And so when I looked at him and how he saw things, I was like, okay, I think it's manageable. So he was very helpful as a painter of the past to show me that you can actually paint something so magnificent and so huge that it can be done. And because sometimes we get overwhelmed and we think, I can't do it, I can't. And we can do anything. We can manifest whatever we can. Now this is a small, image that you're seeing on your computer, but that's a huge painting. I think it's about 40 by 90. So it's a pretty big painting. And this was bought by the Smithsonian and is now in the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian in DC. So right now, currently it's an exhibit in New York of contemporary American Indian art. I was really blessed to be included in that exhibit, and I'm very proud of that. So I mentioned that to you. I also got a write-up, and I got a picture of this in the New York Times. So now that's my braggadocio for the moment. Where I live, the vernacular of being what it feels like to be a New Mexican. I've been in Santa Fe since I was 16 years old. Like Seth said, I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And I spent a lot of time in Taos, in Penasco, in the northern villages in all different seasons. And so this is one of the earlier winterscapes that I did called Village of the Black Cross. And it has a certain moodiness to it. And so how do you really paint a spiritual experience of something that you have, you know, that's based on faith, and not try to make it about God or Christianity or Catholicism? And I really wanted nature to be the predominant image. So nature really is, it really dwarfs church and dwarfs the Black Cross, and it's really about the connection between earth and sky and temperature and seasons. So this is the same village from a different perspective in spring, and much more about monsoon seasons, which we're in now. We have all these clouds rolling in, and then we've got these, everything's blooming, the fruit trees. A lot of people will often reference it and say, that looks kind of like Cubism, highly influenced by Taos modernism. I'm somewhat of a American Indian Saisoniste. So I really look at the fractions and the way things are broken up to best describe movements, light, form, rhythms. Everything is very strategic of how I put these together. Like there's, you know, how does the foreground relate to the sky? And how do I create repetition, rhythms? These are things I learned from my father. The speed of lines comes from Sam. You know, there's influence from a great many people. Storms. This is a fall landscape. A lot of drama that happens between the earth and the sky, light, rain, all of these things. And that's just because I'm outside and I'm looking like for hours on end. Like, how does nature create and manage these things? And I've seen better images of nature, like on Instagram and stuff, because nature's so amazing and beautiful. But when I get to paint it, I get to just do what I want. I get to make a village with just a tree in it. You know, it's all just about spring. And this is called the Heart of the Village. I did this painting with a broken hand. I went to the Galapagos Islands about 10 years ago. I broke this wrist, and there's like a little metal plate in there. I slipped on some rocks when I was looking at iguanas, and I broke my hand and had to go into Ecuador and have surgery done on it. And I came back and I tried to get back to painting, and I did this painting with this hand instead of this one, right? And so it was a really fun experience, and I can look at it and I can see how there's interesting things that happen, like the rain's actually going this way and it's going that way, because when I'm working with my hands, I'm thinking with the different side of my brain. And it changed my consciousness, and I started writing, and there was a part of my creativity that really blossomed when I changed the use of one hand to the other. It was just a fun experience. This is a sacred mesa in the village that I told you that Sam and Elfrida had so many dear friends, of which were Maria Martinez and her family, Tony Day, and a number of other people. They're intertwined in a really rich period of New Mexico history. And this is their sacred mesa of that village. And there's a small Catholic chapel. I have no religious affiliation, but there's a lot of beautiful churches, and they're always there. So that's why they enter into the paintings. Little different palette. And this is a canyon that I fish in. I go fishing in this canyon. And so it has a lot of this. It's much more sort of pink and more granite. I think the canyon, the rocks in there are granite. And so it has this color palette. And I just introduced it into the sky. So this is fun. I included this because I started doing these wood constructions, and Sam used to give me all of his scrap pieces of wood. So each one of those, that's fiddleback maple that you'll see in there, and you'll see that's claro walnut. Those are just from like the back where Sam would cut the back out of the chair right here. He would have a little scrap piece of wood that arced, and I would take them and and modify them with those chisel marks, right? And then polish them up nice, and became a woodworker for a month or so, and introduced them into these wood constructions. So I did a whole group of paintings that were really, people would say, "Oh, I love the wood," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's that's from a Sam Maloof chair." It's the scraps that he used to have a lot of them, and I got boxes of them. He used to send me home, and I'd ship a bunch back, and I still have some. Um, I'm also a painter, but I'm also a jeweler, and I'm doing it less. So you'll see my little scruffy hands here working on a lapidary wheel, and I've got a piece of turquoise there. And I started making jewelry, and I loved working with metal. I loved working. They're very sculptural, so they look like spiders. They're not meant for everybody to like wear. I don't really care about whether it works or fits you. It's more like I want to make jewelry, but I'm a sculptor, so I'm a modernist jeweler that's non-functional. You can wear them, of course, but this one is an interesting bracelet because um, it is composed of all of these different American turquoise mines. So the one stone that you see that's the largest is from a mine called um, uh, uh, Lone Mountain. There's Bisbee, there's Royston, there's Blue Gem, there's Kingman, number 8, and I could go on, but there's a different mine from every American mine. So when I started doing jewelry, I was much more interested in creating um, an animated, almost kind of like a bug or organism. So this one actually does look like a 2-headed bug when you look at it from the back. And the mine, the turquoise, it's all Lone Mountain, really great, high quality. I only make maybe 10 pieces a year. I don't do a lot of jewelry. I do it almost recreationally. And it kind of, a lot of my family back on the reservation are really good jewelers. So somehow it was in my blood. So when I picked up metal, when I picked up turquoise, and I started composing all of this, it just came. It was natural. It's in my DNA. This is a pendant and with coral, and I made it with a little heart with the arrow that goes through it. Now that's actually it's what do you call it? It's you take a very soft pumice and you carve the image, the form that you want in there, and then you put another block on there, tie it with like a rubber band or piece of rubber really tight, and so it's called tufa casting, and then you pour the hot metal in there and then modify it however you need to. Of course, the stones are added on top of that, but this was really meant to be like a symbol of, like, it's based on a Navajo naja, which is, you'll find them on the very end of a squash blossom. But I wanted it to also be kind of like a Valentine's Day arrow through the heart symbol. So I made a matching bracelet for that with the carved turquoise. And this is all coral. It's one of my favorite things. But see, like, if you could raise your hand, would you wear it? Most people would be like, no, I wouldn't wear it. It's too big. It's not really meant for me to, like, and the way they're made, they're more feminine forms and things, but they're big enough to fit a guy, right? So I made a Navajo wrist guard, which is called a gato, and that was the last thing I made with the coral. And this is actually a kind of like a bug. If you look at the top, the head would be the turquoise and the body is the coral, and there's sort of little wing characters things off of it. And I like that. I wanted to keep it, but somebody wanted to buy it for their husband, so I said I would sell it to him, and had fun with it. Another bracelet, a ring, again, amazing turquoise. This is, I think, this is a high grade Kingman, and if you look at the sides of it, they're sort of corn stalks that the stone pedestals on, referencing a lot of Native American deities. This one I actually drilled into the turquoise and then set small little beads into it to make 2 eyes and a mouth, and then animate it, right? So it would be an animated work. This is my house, or this is not my house, but this is my place in Berkeley. I live on a hillside. If you've ever been to Berkeley, I live on Arlington, so it cascades down off this hillside, and everything that you look at is like this, right? So there's house that's built upon house because it's all, going straight up, and then you don't really get much sky in it. And I really could understand artists like, Richard Diebenkorn, when he was working and living in Berkeley, all of those Berkeley paintings. I said, those are landscapes. And people are like, that's not, it's an abstract. And it's like, no, those are really landscapes. And then the ocean parks, of course, are more, they reference San Francisco. So this is East Bay. So again, you can tell the vernacular, the palette changes. So this is California, and the color palette is changing for me. Like, I don't use this palette when I'm in New Mexico, which shows me that my relationship to where I'm at is highly influential on me. This is just a smaller study for that larger painting you saw earlier. California, Yosemite. I went to Yosemite and I couldn't believe my eyes. One of the beautiful things and experiences for a landscape painter. And so I watched the water just flow for an hour or two and said, how am I going to paint that? And somehow it stains my consciousness. I can just remember a lot of it. And I have to map out everything. So I'll shoot things on my camera phone. So I'll shoot something really quick. And then when I'm referencing, just landmarks, scale, trees, and I do ads, I omit a lot of stuff. So I'll omit people in there if there's telephone poles, sometimes roads. So I want to keep the focus on just the nature. And so frolicking magpies, I see them all the time when I'm fishing. They fight with each other. They're the most amazing accents on nature. They are pretty fantastic. So I do a lot of them. I love doing magpies. They're just fun. And I love the way they interact with each other. They fight, they steal stuff from one another. They're always mischievous, and they're just gorgeous. They're really beautiful birds. I saw this raccoon when I was in Berkeley. He was on the island right between Berkeley and San Francisco, which is Yerba Buena Island. And I had a studio there. And these raccoons would come out, and in the real image, he was eating a churro. Somebody gave him a churro, and I shot his picture, and he was just sitting there holding the churro in the water. And I changed it to a fish. I thought it was more palatable than a churro was. Some bears. This is called night migration of the bears. So I like doing animals a lot. I love doing nature. As you see, most of the stuff is like cats, animals. This is a really large scale drawing, Realm of the Cat People. And it's just like a garden of I really love cats, felines. My relationship with the ocean, I lived in Venice. So I do a lot of these octopi or cephalopods, and I love the way they're very sensual, and I love the movements, and I try to create them and draw them as they would move. And you can see that kind of influences the landscapes. This was a real sky. This is actually one of those skies that I actually saw, and I got it down immediately and quickly, and it looks so crazy and fantastical. But I show people the original photo on my phone, and they're like, that looks just like the sky that you painted. It was just fun. I'm working on a series of paintings about our changing planet. This is a volcano, and I did a whole series of volcanoes because I love this power of the earth thing. I really love this idea that I think this one is in the Autry Museum there in Los Angeles. They bought a big one from one of their last shows. And I have a lot of fun doing these because I make these up. I imagine what would a volcanic experience be like. I went to Hawaii, and I got a real idea of like how this is still like this living planet. And then there's so much stuff happening right now with global climate changing. I did this on the day that 120 tornadoes touched down in Oklahoma. I worked on a series of paintings of forest fires, of tornadoes, of floods, all of them referencing global climate change, because I'm right in the middle of it. So it's really hard. If you're going to paint landscapes, you're going to paint nature, it just affects and influences you. I did this painting during the pandemic because everybody was inside, everybody was separated from one another. And my children, I was married to a Taos Pueblo woman for a long time. So I did these of New York and I did them of New Mexico. And I just wanted an image that talked about solitude and fear of one another and being separated from one another. I did this right in the like March when everybody was afraid of dying, you know? And this is one of the series of paintings, which is really just about, it's like clouds reflected on a silent city. It's New York, and it's just like quiet, and nature is really, you know, there's a lot of mystery in it, but this was really a painting that responded to the pandemic, right? It was about like, there's no life except for like the sky reflected on these big high rises. This is a big painting I did, much more abstract. It's called Dark Carnival. And I don't want to get into all of it. I'm just going to show you just how the work changes and evolves. And this is the last slide I have to show you, which is the last painting that I just have been working on. This will be included in the exhibition that I'm doing in August. And it's a self-portrait. And it's really about everything that transpires in a lifetime. And there's a cycle of, you know, being born and having all of these things that happen to us and all of the influences and things that affect us. And included in the images are just, you know, abstractions of people and places, memories, going to Japan, going into Italy, my kids leaving home, and all of these. Sometimes I do these paintings about ex-girlfriends, right? So usually when I do a breakup, I do a breakup painting. Most of them are like floral motifs and things. And it's just a remark on what it felt like, you know, and without being literal, because the more literal you are, sometimes it's harder to explain. I just want to show the feeling. I just want to show the emotion. And then the mystery of it all, it can remain personal and intimate to me. And yet I can show the whole world, hundreds or even thousands of people, what the experience felt like. And maybe someone will see in there and they'll say, I know what that's like. I know I've been there. I know what that feels like. I know what that feels like to be afraid. I know what that feels like to be in the pandemic. I know what that feels like when your kids leave home and you got an empty nest. But I didn't make it literal. So with that, I think I'm going to be pretty close on cue. I'm a minute over because I wanted to give you guys 15 minutes for Q&A. And I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to close down the screen. And if, okay, can you guys all still hear me good?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That was
Great.
excellent.
Steph, you take over and tell me how you want to finish it off.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. And yeah, so we have plenty of time for some Q&A. You can type your questions into the chat box, everyone, and I will get to as many questions as I can. So as people are starting to type in there, I'll get us started. So I'm hoping you can talk more about the role of water in your work, and you know, it plays very prominently in some of your paintings, and I even see in your jewelry, thinking about the turquoise. I'm just, and you know, with speaking of global warming, and we've got the drought in the West, I'm wondering how you think about water and the role it plays in your work.
Sure. I came downstairs to see if I could get more see if I can get some more light down here on me because I've been in the dark. Um, let's see. Water's always been really important. I grew up in a desert, right? I was born and raised in Gallup, New Mexico. But when I moved to Venice, Italy, I lived there with my family for about 3 years. I was immersed in water, like canals and the Adriatic and boats. And so it was a whole different experience. And so the aqueous experience of being around like fish and you know jellyfish and birds and humidity, it was really wonderful. I hadn't been around it. It was so funny because when I moved there and I was on the water in the summertime, my hair turned curly and I never had curly hair, right? Because that humidity was so present in my world. And then I'd come back to New Mexico, and we've been going through a lot of drought here up until like just recently. We've been getting a lot of rain. And so for me, water really is source of life. And it is, as the protests in Standing Rock have taught us, it's really mini wachoni, which is that water is life. And so symbolically incorporating those ideas into my work. So you'll see a lot of rain, you'll see rivers, you'll see the relationship between those, condensation, precipitation. It's my language. So I hope that clarifies a little bit. I
Great.
see a question that says, what medium do you use in the painting where you mix in the sand? So I'm using a combination of acrylic polymer, which is like a golden gel medium. I mix sand into it in different viscosity. So sometimes it's very fluid and I'm moving it around. Other times I'm actually creating texture and building up surface that's three-dimensional. So it is in its original manifestation for the Navajo people. Sand painting is used as a ceremonial ritual, but I wanted to incorporate it into my work as a Navajo artist. How do I make contemporary art using sand and incorporating that for a surface, and but also to honor that tradition? But so it just became part of the medium that I wanted to explore through experimentation. So I hope that's helpful. And I see another question about the Grand Canyon painting. I think that was about 40 inches by around 90. So it's a pretty large painting. A lot of the paintings I'm working on for my show in August are pretty large. They're pretty big paintings.
Well, hoping you can also talk a little bit about your process in addition to the materials. Like, do you do drawings before you do these large landscape paintings? I know that one of them you said was a study for a larger piece, or do you do drawings for your jewelry beforehand?
No, well, for the jewelry I do, because I have to carve all that stuff out or have somebody help me, manifest some of those things. I don't do preliminary drawings for these things. I know what I'm going to paint. Like when I know I'm going to paint Yosemite, I kind of have an idea and I just start it. I just begin it, and then I let it, and then I reference images because it's important, especially with the Grand Canyon. There's other artists who are so strategically, like, it's so important to them. All the monuments are, they say, Moran Point and, this other citadel is, they couldn't be in the same place. They're like 30 miles apart. And so I'm trying to fit in everything. I think that painting of the Grand Canyon has 40 miles of running, so you have to fit it into 90 inches. It's interesting, and so I'm having to reference a little bit of images to make sense of things. But most of the time, it all just comes directly from my hands onto the canvas. I don't draw too much preliminary stuff. I see a question that's from Michelle Martinez, and it says, hey, Tony, we saw the exhibit you curated at Maloof Gallery a few years back. So great. Are you still teaching? Um, I have not been teaching. It kind of fell apart after the pandemic. I was teaching a summer course at UC Berkeley. I have taught at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I do continue mentoring younger artists. So for me, that is part of my process of, when I learn stuff, how do I contribute to community and to other artists? As I learned from Sam. Sam was always a great mentor, and he always supported young artists. That's just what he did. He bought their work, he encouraged them, he attaboyed them more than anybody I know, and I continue in that tradition. So I'm not currently teaching because I got a lot of projects. I'm now curating shows. I'm working on a show with the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. I just had a big meeting with them today of contemporary American Indian artists for 2022. And I'm co-curating an exhibit of my work, of my father's work, at the Wheelwright Museum here in Santa Fe. So I got a full plate. Lots of really great fun things I'm working on. Okay, so LaDonna Kohler, she says, when and where will your exhibit be in Santa Fe? So I have a one-person show. It's about 26 paintings, and it's at the Owings Gallery, which is like OWING. And that catalog should be up virtually in about another 2 weeks, maybe another week. I think it's about probably another week. I think it's all ready. And so if you go to their website, you should be able to see some of the works. At least 16 of the paintings are in the exhibition, and the rest I'm still working on. So I am currently working on finishing that. So Thomas Bostic is talking about neo-native, the exhibition I did at the Maloof Foundation. Sam asked me while he was alive, he said, he's like, son, I want you to curate a show of Indian art for the new museum, or Jacob Javits, or with the museum that's there on the premises. And I was sure I'd love to. And Sam passed, and I got a call maybe, years later, 6 years later, about curating this exhibition. And so it was really an exhibition. And I thought, what kind of art would Sam like in the gallery? So a lot of the artists were people that I highly respected, but I also felt were in this tradition of craftsmanship and the level that Sam would have appreciated. So I kind of channeled him for a moment as co-curator. Like, what would Sam like? Would Sam like this artist? And like, yeah, I know he would. So that really was a lot of fun. I love that show. I continue promoting contemporary American Indian art. And so that's really vital and important to me. So it was a very important exhibition in terms of a lot of new young artists who have since become really, really important people. So you'll see people in that exhibition who, like Cara Romero was in Desert X, that was out there in the valley, out in Palm Springs. They had indigenous, she did billboards. So if you drove through Palm Springs and Palm Desert, you would have seen some of her billboards of Chemehuevi, local American Indians. Also, there's a really great one that Nicholas Galanin, who I curated into other exhibitions, he wasn't a neo-native, but he did that great big Indian land Hollywood sign that's out there. He did this big totem pole that's behind me here. I don't know if you can see it there. It's got a lamp in front of it, but he's just a wonderful artist. I love to champion a lot of the new artists who are doing work, and so for me, it's an honor to be able to have an opportunity to curate shows in different museums. So I want to continue doing that. Let's see, Devin. Devin is asking me about, did you do European landscapes when you lived there? Were you at all influenced by Tibetan sand paintings and the clouds? Yeah, Devin. So I did a couple of paintings of Venice when I lived there, canals, but it is my objective. I bought a house in northern Italy, just north of Turin, and it's actually up in the Alps. And one of the things that I want to do is dedicate a whole group of paintings and shows just painting like Alps. They're amazing. They are also very kind of out of my consciousness. So for me to be able to work and paint those, part of them is being in that context and really feeling and breathing in that vernacular. So that's on the menu. I'm going to do that. So yes. And also Tibetan sand paintings are heavily the same concept as Navajo sand paintings. The Tibetan and Navajo follow the same 4 directional colors and iconography, and the concept is very much the same. We believe that we are related to that culture and also those traditions of sand painting. So I'm well aware of them, and I think they're super fantastic. And so I hope that clarifies that. Do we got any other additional questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, you talked about relocation, between, the comparison between the tribe and like Sam's house, which is really interesting. And I was thinking about the relationship with landscape painting. And, when you're painting something, you're kind of trying to capture something, or something that's ephemeral. I'm wondering if you think about that, if you're trying to kind of make something, like you said, the Grand Canyon is always changing, right? Are you trying to capture something that will sort of last uh, in the painting?
Kind of. Well, let me see. My intention it's not about documenting a moment as much it is trying to describe an emotional feeling that I'm having. My response, personal, unique Tony's response to the landscape. Like, how do I see it? And I really look. When I'm looking at it, I'll see stuff and it's just like there's this little click thing that goes off, camera sound that goes off in my head, and I'm bringing all of that in. So when I get in the studio, I'm recollecting all of these things. It is a documentation of something that I'm seeing, but it's more about what I'm feeling. What did I feel when I was right there? What was the temperature? What did it smell like? It's a visceral, but simultaneously experiential, spiritual experience. And it is at its best when the paintings are successful. You look at them and you'll say, like, people will tell me, like, wow, Tony, that's like a Tony Abeyta landscape I just saw, when I was driving to Arizona yesterday. And I'm like, that's pretty big compliment. So yeah, I for me, I'm not documenting a period of time or like anything other than just like that experience of what it felt like to me as just the artist.
Great.
There's one other thing. It says, thanks for a ephemeral question. That the idea of change seems also always there. Also, the bigger idea of displacement. So this idea and the concept of relocation. Now, I don't like to dwell so much on the trauma and tragedy of yesteryear. Um, every indigenous person across this country has a very similar story. Their mythologies will always talk about colonialism and what it felt like to have like a metaphorical freeway run through your homelands. And so how do we heal from it? And Sam, being a really exemplary person, he took this time. And I remember him once saying, he says, son, I sometimes think that I can't do this. I really can't do this. And he was getting older. He was tired. He was lonely. I saw Sam in one of the darkest moments of his life, and I was a dear friend to him. I love Sam like a father. He was very much like a father figure to me. And I watched him rebound, build, and recreate and heal from all of that trauma. And what once was the old house became the new house. And so it's like that backdrop that you have, Seth, of the downstairs of the old house. I remember that when it was at the old location, and they moved everything. And there's kind of like you get to bring with you something original and something that is vital and something that is precious from the past. You bring with you and you create something on top of that. Metaphorically, when I talk about Native American relocation and how do we heal, it's the same way, through the guiding spirit of that's my son calling from Barcelona. So there you are. It's really about that experience. For me, it just is, you know, I kind of had to say it like this. It's like Sam really showed me the presence of God. Like I really saw through his life and through everything that transpired. I thought there's an order, there is there is some remarkable force that is creating this new world for him. And he went on to create new things. I saw the last piece of furniture that he did. I watched everything happen, you know, the opening of the museum there, everything that he dreamed that would happen, he manifested. And we can all do that. We can all be Sam's in terms of, it's just, do we, like, to what level do we dream? Sam dreamed really big. He created that foundation, which I hope all of you take a look at the Maloof Foundation. And if you would like to support the programs and the endeavors at the Maloof Foundation, it continues his legacy of wanting to inspire people, woodworkers, craftsmen, artists, collectors. He was a collector himself. It helps to clarify a vision. So when you make your contribution for, and I'm just making this pitch because I love Sam and I know, you know, I'm sure Seth could do this too, but I love that the property there and the gardens, and the kids love it. Artists love it. It's inspired me. It's inspired other artists, woodworker. They go in there. That is, some of you may be woodworkers out there. It is the holy grail of inspiration. You know, people like, I just want some of Sam's sawdust. And I think there's something really beautiful in that we have a source to go to now that talks about a life, and that is in its own way to make a pilgrimage there for woodworkers. They walk away and I've seen them just shake his hand and they're just like, I've watched them tremble. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful to say. Let's see if there's anything else. I think we're 6 minutes over, if it's okay with everybody. Does anybody else want to talk about anything else? I'm here.
Yeah, if anybody else wants to add any last questions. Well, but thank you for your contributions to continuing that legacy. And I'd say a great way to see a Tony Abeyta painting is in the Maloof house. If you take that tour, as soon as you walk in, you'll see it turn to the right when you walk in that front door, and there's a great piece there. Well, looks like that's about it for the Q&A. So we did record this talk. So if you happen to come in late, or your Wi-Fi, you know, went away for a few minutes, maybe you missed a bit, I'll be sending everyone a link to the recording on YouTube once we get it up there, and you could rewatch it or catch pieces that you missed. But I want to just say thanks to everybody for joining us, and I'll leave it to you, Tony, if you have any last words before we go.
Yeah, I guess in closing, thanks for taking the time. It is, for me, it's about how one man can have influence on another person, an artist, and it changes the whole way that we think about art and creativity, inspiration, and how can we practice altruism and to help other people. You know, some people use that term paying it forward, but it's how does one person create another, you know, mentor. I mentor people, young artists and young painters specifically, because I learned from other people. You know, I had two major important art figures in my life. Well, three. My father helped me out tremendously. Sam Maloof was also a really important person, and Agnes Martin, who was another friend of mine from Taos, New Mexico. And all of them were, in their own ways, taught me different ways of looking at art. And I learned, about the spiritual in art from Sam, and I learned about, art for, art as a lifestyle, as a practice from Agnes. I mean, for me, it was taught me that art's not about making money. It's not at all. It's just about this experience, and how can we make things that are a contribution to our our spirit, our families, our communities, those things. We can all mentor people in our own ways, and lead by example. So that's what I got out of this whole experience, and that's why I'm here talking about. It's not about my art. I really wanted to talk about Sam the whole time, but you guys would be like, well, I don't know. That's we didn't sign up for. We want to see what this in an artist is doing. Check out my show. It's it's Owings Gallery. I think there's a link on there, and there might be some stuff up there, but it's actually going up in about 2 weeks. So I hope you had a really great time. I hope that it was interesting to you, and stay safe and wear the mask now, because now we got this new variant and things might be changing for the other direction, and just be safe.
All right. Thanks so much, Tony. Amazing stuff. Thanks for sharing some of your work in addition to stories of Sam. All right. Take care, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Have a good evening, everyone.